December 9, 1967. Oakland, California.
It was a cold winter night, a night that quietly passed through history without headlines or news reports. Yet for the few people who witnessed what happened, it became a night that would never be forgotten. According to those witnesses, it was also a night Bruce Lee himself never spoke about publicly.
Not once. Not ever.
At that time Bruce Lee was only 27 years old.
To the general public he was almost completely unknown.
The films that would later make him a global icon had not yet been made. The television appearances that would introduce him to millions were still years away. In 1967 he was simply a young martial artist running a small training school in Oakland's Chinatown. In that modest school Bruce Lee taught a handful of dedicated students. His teachings were based on Wing Chun, the martial art he had learned in Hong Kong, but he was already transforming it into something new.
He believed traditional martial arts were too rigid and limited.
Instead, he was developing his own system called Jeet Kune Do, meaning the way of the intercepting fist.
Jeet Kune Do rejected strict forms and fixed techniques. Bruce believed that real fighting required adaptability. Instead of memorizing patterns, a fighter needed to respond naturally to whatever happened. Efficiency, speed, and directness were his principles.
To Bruce Lee, martial arts were not about tradition, they were about truth. Among his small circle of students and fellow fighters, Bruce Lee had already developed a mysterious reputation. People whispered about his incredible speed and precision. They talked about his famous one-inch punch, which could knock a person backward with very little movement. Those who had sparred with him claimed he moved so quickly that their eyes could barely follow his strikes. However, most of these stories came from demonstrations or controlled sparring sessions.
Many people respected Bruce Lee's skill, but others questioned whether his abilities would hold up in a real fight.
After all, a true fight was different from a demonstration. In a real fight there were no rules, no referees, and no safety. That question would be answered on the night of December 9, 1967. Years later, one of Bruce Lee's closest students, martial artist Dan Inosanto, hinted that such a fight had taken place. According to him, only a small number of witnesses were present. They had been sworn to secrecy by Bruce Lee himself. For decades none of them spoke openly about the event. The story, as reconstructed from the few accounts that exist, begins with a challenge. The man who challenged Bruce Lee was not an amateur or a reckless troublemaker. He was an experienced fighter, a large and powerful man who had spent years training in brutal combat systems. Witnesses later described him as a professional who had fought in underground competitions across different countries. Because his real identity has never been confirmed publicly, he became known simply as the Russian. The Russian fighter was said to be around 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighed about 220 pounds. He had a background in Soviet combat training systems similar to Sambo and other military fighting methods. According to some accounts, he had fought dozens of matches and rarely lost. When he heard stories about Bruce Lee's abilities, he was skeptical. To him, Bruce Lee sounded like a talented performer rather than a tested fighter. He decided he wanted to see the truth for himself. Through mutual contacts in the martial arts community, a message was eventually sent to Bruce Lee. The Russian wanted to fight him in a private match.
Not a tournament. Not a demonstration. A real fight. Bruce Lee did not immediately respond.
According to witnesses, he read the message quietly and put it away. For several days he said nothing about it. Eventually he agreed, but only under very specific conditions. The fight would take place in a private location, not in a gym or martial arts school. Only 7 people would be allowed to watch. Each fighter could bring 3 witnesses, and 1 neutral person would observe the match to confirm the outcome. There would be almost no rules. No weapons, no eye gouging, and no biting, but everything else was allowed. The fight would continue until one fighter could no longer continue or admitted defeat. Perhaps the most unusual condition was the final one. If someone was seriously injured, everyone present would say it had been a training accident. No police, no publicity, no investigation. The Russian accepted these terms. The location chosen for the fight was an abandoned industrial building in West Oakland. The structure was scheduled to be demolished in early 1968, making it a perfect place for a private and secret meeting.
On the night of December 9, the witnesses arrived one by one.
Bruce Lee came with 3 of his students, including Dan Inosanto and James Lee. The Russian brought 2 companions of his own.
The final witness was a neutral observer with experience in combat training.
The room where the fight would take place was large and empty.
The concrete floor echoed with every movement. A single skylight allowed faint moonlight to enter the space. Bruce Lee wore simple black pants and a black shirt. He was barefoot, as was his opponent. The 2 men stood facing each other across the room. No greetings were exchanged. No bows were made.
There was only silence as each fighter studied the other.
The observer stepped back and gave a simple instruction. Begin when ready. For several seconds neither man moved. Witnesses later said the tension in the room was almost unbearable. Bruce Lee stood completely still, watching his opponent carefully.
The Russian began approaching slowly, step by step, measuring the distance between them. When the distance closed to about 15 feet, Bruce Lee suddenly moved. According to witnesses, his movement was incredibly fast. In a brief moment he closed the distance, lightly touched the Russian's forehead with his fingers, and returned to his original position. The gesture was not an attack.
It was a message. Bruce was demonstrating that he could reach his opponent whenever he wanted. The Russian understood the meaning immediately.
The real fight began seconds later. The Russian attacked with a powerful straight punch aimed at Bruce Lee's centerline. Bruce avoided it by the smallest margin, moving his head just enough for the strike to miss.
More punches followed.
Hooks, combinations, and aggressive forward pressure.
But Bruce Lee seemed impossible to hit.
Instead of blocking, he simply moved out of the way at the last possible moment. His movements were minimal and precise, wasting no energy. Then he countered.
A quick low kick struck the Russian's lead leg just above the knee. The impact echoed loudly across the empty room.
The Russian stumbled slightly. In that brief opening, Bruce Lee stepped forward and delivered a rapid combination of strikes to the body and jaw. The speed shocked the witnesses. Before the Russian could fully react, Bruce had already stepped away again. Despite the pain, the Russian continued fighting. Realizing he could not easily land punches, he attempted to grab Bruce Lee and bring the fight into close grappling range where his size advantage might help.
For a brief moment he managed to catch Bruce's wrist. But Bruce responded instantly.
Using a precise strike to the elbow joint, he forced the Russian to release his grip. The fight continued with increasing intensity.
The Russian attacked again and again, mixing punches and kicks. Bruce intercepted many of the strikes before they fully developed, redirecting their energy.
This was the essence of Jeet Kune Do, intercepting the opponent's attack rather than reacting after it happened. Eventually Bruce Lee landed another powerful series of strikes, including a kick that knocked the Russian off balance. The larger fighter fell to the concrete floor but quickly tried to stand again. At that moment Bruce spoke for the first time.
"Stop," he said calmly.
He told the Russian he was injured and that the fight was already decided.
But the Russian refused to quit.
Determined to continue, he attacked again. This time Bruce Lee responded with complete control.
He intercepted the attacks and countered with precise strikes to the body and jaw.
Another sweep sent the Russian to the ground. The injured fighter attempted to stand once more but collapsed. Finally he nodded in surrender.
The fight was over.
Witnesses said Bruce Lee stepped away and turned toward the wall of the building. His hands were shaking. Not from exhaustion, but from the emotional intensity of the moment. Later he told his students something surprising. He admitted that during the fight he had felt a powerful urge to continue attacking even after victory was certain. That realization disturbed him deeply. Bruce Lee believed martial arts should develop discipline and self-control. The idea that he might lose control frightened him. Before leaving the building, he asked the witnesses to promise that they would never speak publicly about what had happened. According to those who were there, the Russian later approached Bruce Lee and thanked him for showing restraint.
He said Bruce could have caused far greater damage but chose not to. Then the injured fighter left the building and disappeared from the story. The abandoned building itself was demolished only weeks later. No official record of the fight exists. No photographs were taken. No video was recorded. What remains are only the memories of the few people who claimed to witness the event. Whether every detail is completely accurate or not, the story captures something important about Bruce Lee's character. It reflects the philosophy he later taught to the world: true mastery is not simply the ability to defeat an opponent, but the ability to control oneself. Bruce Lee went on to become the most famous martial artist in history. His films revolutionized action cinema and inspired generations of fighters and filmmakers. Yet the lessons he emphasized most strongly were not about violence, but about discipline, awareness, and personal growth. If the events of that December night truly happened as described, they may have played a role in shaping the philosophy Bruce Lee later shared with the world. Because the greatest strength of a warrior is not the power to destroy. It is the power to choose not to.